John Boehner may have walked out of those debt talks on Friday night, but it was President Obama who seized the bully pulpit when he walked into a briefing room full of reporters and spoke in part about how the seemingly endless impasse is being covered.
And, you know, for us not to be keeping those folks in mind every single day when we're up here, for us to be more worried about what some funder says or some talk radio show host says or what some columnist says or what pledge we signed back when we were trying to run, or worrying about having a primary fight. For us to be thinking in those terms instead of thinking about those folks is inexcusable.
But wait, hadn't the New York Times reported just the day before that Obama and Boehner were close to a major deal? Joining us now to talk about how the debt dealing is being covered, Jonathan Strong, reporter for the Daily Caller website, and Ruth Marcus, columnist for the Washington Post. Ruth Marcus, I know you love writing about the budget. It is getting awful hard for even the most dedicated journalists to follow the action here with all different plans and the walkouts. Now they're back at the White House yesterday.
Not to mention the different baselines.
Yes, you do the math?
Yes, because, I mean, that is why some of the reporting has been so confused, and any rational human being would be confused listening to these guys talk. So from my point of view, it's almost a recipe for bad reporting. You have talks going on behind closed doors in an atmosphere of everything must be tweeted immediately. The guys who are involved can barely understand, you know, are you in the current law baseline or the current policy baseline? Right. I'll be happy to give you the lecture off at camera about the differences. And enormously high stakes, the full faith and credit of the U.S.
High stakes. There seems to have been an assumption in a lot of the coverage, Jonathan Strong, that, you know, typical Congress, they'll screw around and screw around at the last minute, they'll have a deal. And maybe they will. But now there's some journalists are starting to ask, are some of these people crazy enough to keep fighting past the deadline and let the U.S. go into default?
Yeah, I actually have concerns that we may not reach a deal, just from my own observations. But the problem is, as you were getting at, these leaders go into a room, and then all we get is this highly politicized readout of what happened.
From each side? From each side.
Sometimes it actually directly contradicts each other on key facts. So you have to triangulate the truth. And I talked to about a dozen insiders last night who said they don't find the reports reliable, but that's the only information they're getting.
Right. It's almost become like this horse race where they're going to have a deal, they're not going to have a deal, it's completely falling apart. But as we saw the president there, Obama, you know, as angry as I've ever seen him, ripping the Republicans. He gave a lot of weight. He came back to it a couple of times, talk radio hosts and columnists.
I took that kind of personally, the columnist part. Those are the people you really need to listen to. I'm sorry.
Do you think he's giving too much weight to the way it's being covered as opposed to the fact that these two sides are dug in and can't seem to hammer out even a short-term deal?
I thought he was hot on Friday, but I also thought he was effective. No, I think his fundamental point is, look, there's something really, really important going on here. We have to get a deal. Don't be distracted by the noise from both sides. And also, look, I mean, this was an interesting moment. The President of the United States got up and said, look, I gave away this. I said I wanted to mess with your entitlements. I gave away this. I said I wanted to raise your taxes. You know, what more, you know, why can't these people say yes? It was a sort of odd way to sell yourself, perhaps, but he really has
to
gone
sell yourself
quite far.
By talking about how much you have given up in negotiations.
And how much pain you're ready to inflict on everybody.
But I wonder, Jonathan, whether you think the press has basically bought into Obama's argument that he has compromised and compromised again and again, done things that are painful for him, painful for his party, and it's the House Republicans who are being intransigent.
The Republicans I talked to say that they feel Obama's megaphone gives him the power to set the narrative.
He can just drown them out.
Right.
I mean, Boehner has a press conference after Obama on Friday night, and it was covered on cable news, but it doesn't get anything of the weight of the President of the United States speaking in the White House.
So they're afraid that he's been the one who's had the voice here. And I think that the biggest sin of omission by the news media is not, you know, Democrats ought to have had to introduce a budget plan by this point. And they haven't really, but Obama gave a speech, the CBO said we can't score a speech, and they have not really faced accountability for not.
So do you think that the journalists by and large, and obviously a lot of people in the media covering this, have been too harsh in saying that these House Republicans influenced by the Tea Party just won't budge and not done enough to hold the Democratic side accountable?
Well, you know, it's difficult because that's a subjective question, right? So, I mean, from what perspective? If you live in Nancy Pelosi's district, you're saying, yeah, just raise taxes. If you live in Eric Cantor's district, you're saying, how does this make any sense? We're spending twice as much as we're getting in taxes.
And then just in terms of, again, following the action, the New York Times went pretty hard with that story, saying close to a deal, and then Boehner tweeted false. And turns out Boehner was right. They weren't close to a deal.
Because, as the president has reminded us, nothing is agreed on until everything is agreed on. Mm-hmm. And I think, by the way, that this has been one of the most fascinating uses that I've seen of the bully pulpit, where the president has, at least until now, done a very effective job of putting the Republicans on the defensive and using his power to really command attention. I do think in the end I'm continue to be optimistic that if we don't have a grand bargain, we will at least avert Armageddon, which is the definition of success these days.
Right, but so it could be an ugly compromise. It doesn't really resolve much, but gets us past default. And I wonder how the press will play that.
In defense of the New York Times, real quick, they reported Democratic leaders were told by White House officials that the deal was imminent. Now that could have been true, and a deal never was reached.
I see. So in other words, they may have been properly reporting what their sources said. Of course, when you put it on the front page, it carries a lot of weight.
Right.
I don't really need to remind anybody that this story will continue since we are now 9 days from a possible U.S. government default on debt.